Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Hello and welcome to Race Haven Live. My name is Dr. Scott Speed and I appreciate you being here. This is part 2 of a series of live shows called America, We Need to Talk. And it is designed to be a dialogue where we, you and I, can learn and communicate our way towards collective solutions to the social challenges facing America. I'm piloting this live show idea to see how it goes over the course of this month. So if you like this format, please let me know on social media or through email at solutions@RaceHavenPodcast.com. Join me here each Wednesday this month at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time to hear my commentary on a variety of relevant topics and to share your questions, concerns, hopes, and solutions about any topic involving race relations and social issues in America. My agenda is to work towards the ideal of us all being one nation, indivisible. And we're going to do that using the communication skill of dialogue. And in order for dialogue to be effective, there has to be common ground to work from. So if you agree with this ideal that our country was founded on the idea of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, then we have common ground. If you agree that by working towards this ideal, and I emphasize work, it will make America a better place for our children and grandchildren, then we have common ground. And if we have common ground, let's dialogue. There's nothing that we can't get through, even if we disagree on some things. If we have that common ground, I believe that we can work towards solutions together, and that's what this show is designed to do. So with that being said, to join the dialogue, simply dial 929-477-4107 and press 1. So the show lineup for today. My uncommon commentary will start out the show, and this is basically me thinking out loud. Usually I say uncommon commentary because it's usually different than what I'm hearing or reading out there, so that's why I call it uncommon. And my uncommon commentary topic today is going to be me challenging the belief that group economics, more college degrees, and more voting will solve issues facing African-American people. I'm also going to share some radical solutions. Also, the show is going to include your calls, your questions, your comments. They can be about my commentary, or it could be anything, revolving around race relations and social issues in America. You can call up with your questions or comments or perspectives and share them with me today. And then we're going to close out with our In the Media segment. And this is where I share my perspective about a hot topic being discussed in social media and the news media. And today I'm going to share some thoughts about the comments from Ben Carson on enslaved Africans being immigrants who came to America. Well, I'll just leave it there for now. So, we'll get into that a little bit later. So to start things out, I'm going to get into some of my uncommon commentary. And before I do that, I want to, just preface, just for those who may be new to the show, that the concept of dialogue is the foundation of this show. I don't believe in debate. I don't believe in arguing. I don't believe in debating. I believe in dialogue. And there's several tenets to dialogue, but the one that I want to share to preface the comments that I'm about to make, there's two. I want to share this, and I'm going to compare it to debate. Because, we live in a debate-based society, and we all went to school learning about debates and debate clubs, but no one ever actually taught dialogue. So that's one of the things that I attempt to do through this show. So in dialogue, one submits one's best thinking, knowing that other people's reflections will help improve it rather than destroy it. To contrast that, in debate, one submits one's best thinking and defends it against challenge to show that it is right. So what you're going to hear from me and my thoughts and my commentary, I already know from some of the comments and responses I've gotten on Facebook that many people find them disagreeable. And I want you to know right from the onset that I'm not here to say that I'm right. I'm not here to, say that I'm right and that you're wrong. I'm here to submit my best thinking. And I know that other people's reflections will help improve it. And I'm not afraid of it being destroyed because I'm working towards solutions just like many of you. We invest a lot of time and energy thinking about these things. And if you're listening to this show, I know that you share that with me and that you invest a lot of time and energy. So I want to hear from you and understand that, I am not submitting, excuse me, I'm having some issues today. I'm not submitting my thoughts in an attempt to be right. I'm submitting them in an attempt to share my best thinking out loud and with the hopes that you all will improve on it. The next thing is this. Dialogue assumes that many people have pieces of the answer and that together they can develop them into a workable solution. Debate assumes that there is a right answer and that someone has it. Again, this is a dialogue show. I assume that we all don't read the same information. I assume that we all don't come from the same household. We don't come from the same community. We don't come from the same education. So therefore, we all have different perspectives. And I think that's okay. I think that's a good thing. It's impossible for everyone to know everything. So again, I assume that I only have part of the answers based on the direction I've chosen to go with my research in an attempt to find solutions. But I believe that you all have solutions as well, and we want to hear them. So please call up and share them. You see, one of my biggest issues with the commentary that we hear in traditional news media, as well as within, our leadership in terms of politics, is that it's all debate-based. It's that we have to have these experts who have to know everything, and what they say is right. And even in the way our politics are posited, it's about, one side is right and the other side is wrong. And it's like black and white, and they don't make any room for gray. And, we live in a world of complexity, in a world of gray, a world of nuance and layers and levels. So with all that being said, I hope that, we can unpeel some of that nuance and layers through this dialogue today. So to get into my uncommon commentary, again, I like to preface things just by saying that I'm going to leave out a lot of context. Okay. And I know that you guys are going to help me. You're going to call in and you're going to help me to fill in some of the context of what I leave out. But I'm going to share my best thinking. I'm going to do my best. But I want you all to call up by simply dialing 929-477-4107 and press 1 to jump in. Okay. So with that being said, let's get into it. So I posted something on Facebook, and trust me, I already got some feedback on it. So I already know that some people are disagreeable with what I shared. But my comments was this. I basically said what I said to you on the onset, that I'm going to challenge, the belief that group economics, more college degrees, and more voting will solve issues facing African-American people. And I posted an article that said, something to the effect that, hey, news media, white people are poor too. And I shared some information on Facebook about the fact that, 70% of African Americans are not poor. And I shared that, a certain percentage of, the article goes into sharing, figures about, quote unquote, white poverty and things like that. And I thought that the article provide a level of context. And what I want you all to know is that I'm having this conversation from an economic standpoint, not from a race relations standpoint, from a position of privilege or anything like that. I'm looking at this from the perspective of economics and our economic system right now. So I want you to put your economic lens on as you listen to the things that I'm about to say. But that article, it rubs some people the wrong way. I'm sorry, the article as well as my comments, just based on some feedback I received already, it rubbed some people the wrong way because they felt like I was trying to compare, African Americans, struggles with poverty and obviously all the historical conditions and present day conditions that lead to that poverty with European American poverty. And that's not what I was trying to do from a race relations standpoint in terms of just, the issues of, privilege and social justice, et cetera. I was comparing it from an I wanted to share that post to share some economic numbers. So I want to get into, some of the thought process that went into that. So basically, as I drive around Atlanta, where I live right now, I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, currently live right outside of Atlanta. Atlanta is one of those places that you see a lot of African American affluence, and it's one of the primary places. There's pockets of African American affluence all throughout the country in various cities, but a lot of it is concentrated in a major way in Atlanta. And when I process all of the conversations going on that I'm hearing when I'm in African American spaces and conscious spaces, or listening to other, or African American radio stations or other podcasts and things like that, I often hear people speak about the African American experience in general terms, as if, they speak about the challenges facing African Americans economically. Again, when we're speaking strictly economically, not talking about social justice issues right now, but strictly in an economic sense. When I'm in these spaces and I hear people speaking about things from an economic, standpoint about African Americans, I always tend to hear. I'm sorry. I mean, not you. I don't like making generalizations like always. So let me say I tend to hear comments like African Americans, don't, do X, Y, Z, or we don't know how to save. We don't know how to invest, and we don't know how to take advantage of economic system, or we are too busy watching social media or reality TV and all these various things. I hear these blanket statements using we, and it's usually speaking to the lowest common denominator of the African American, experience in terms of where African American people fall on the socioeconomic ladder. And the reality is African American people fall on every layer of the socioeconomic, or every level of the socioeconomic ladder in America. And I happen to be in Atlanta, so I get to see a large segment of the affluence within the African American community. So when I'm in these communities, when I'm in certain communities in Atlanta, and I sit in my car and I look around and I see these homeowners, right? And let's just call it middle class all the way up to affluent, right? And in Atlanta, you have many, many dozens, if not hundreds, of communities that have hundreds of households with people that fall within the category of middle class to affluent. And especially when I'm sitting in the various affluent communities, let's just say communities with homes that range from $300,000 to $500,000 up to $1 million, type homes. And I sit in these communities and I literally see dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds, of households, and 90% of those communities are African American. And I see, what we tend to see as outward examples of success, big houses and luxury cars. And I'm looking at these things, but then I'm running through my mind some of the commentary that I'm hearing when people say what we, quote unquote, we don't do, or quote unquote, we don't have. And something's not vibing in my mind when I listen to that narrative, because then in addition to that, I look around at my peers and I look around at, people that I grew up with and people that I went to college with. And I see people winning in ways that their parents or grandparents didn't win or weren't winning. And granted, let's say this, their parents and grandparents, they laid the foundation to put them in a position to win at another level, right? At a higher level on the social economic scale. So, when I look around, I see, African American people graduating from, African American universities, all HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities at record rates. And I see, I went to my cousin's graduation at Florida A&M. My entire large segment of my family went to Florida A&M. Literally mom, dad, grandfather, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, everybody went to Florida A&M except for me, but everyone went to Florida A&M. So I'm always going to graduations, it seems like every few years, at Florida A&M. And I'm seeing all these African-American, young people graduating. And I know that this is happening all across the country. And the majority of them are going to graduate at least to a middle-class standing, in the world, generally speaking. And in America, they're going to graduate to a middle-class level. And I think to myself, that doesn't vibe with some of these narratives about what we aren't doing. I look around at, all of the people I know whose children are going to private schools and various things, and the homeowners and, all these various outward indicators of success. And we all know success is relative, and an outward indicators don't tell the full story. But just for the sake of what we can see, it appears that large segments of African-American people in this country are winning, and at a different level than what I saw growing up, right? So when I see that and I listen to these narratives, it just, again, something's not vibing with me with the narrative about what we aren't doing, and with the narrative of, African-American people are struggling at a certain level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I know, and again, I'm hearing the voices, so just stick with me of where I'm going with this. I already hear the people, some blood boiling on some of you listeners right now based on some conversations I've had, where people tend to point out, well, Scott, those people are the exception. You are the exception. And here's what I think about that. Well, my grandfather on my father's side was an exception. He graduated with a college degree. He was born in 1920, and he went on to graduate with a college degree. And he was an exception, and he was a cycle breaker, as I like to call it. So that put his kids, and in turn me, in a position to be legacy builders, because he broke the cycle of poverty within his family heritage and his lineage. But from my grandfather's position, he had 4 children. So now he was one exception, but because he was an exception, his 4 kids were automatically born into a household that had a level of privilege that put them in the position to go out into the world and be exceptions. So now all of them, including one of my uncles is deceased, but the other 3 were educators and an attorney. And literally, my uncle was a principal, my dad is a retired teacher, and my aunt is an attorney. And they all, again, that's a level, they all achieve a level of success. And then obviously their children, they all had children. So now the family tree is growing, and then that growth and that exception that we're speaking about, it grows exponentially, right? So that's what's happening all across America. We have people who've broken cycles, and you see the success and you see the progress growing exponentially. And then with that being said, when I think about things from that level, I can understand how, more and more people are winning, more and more people are breaking cycles, and then their children and their children and their children, et cetera, is going to grow exponentially. You see, the same thing, okay, let me say it like this. And when you look at the fact that African-American people have only had access to the full American dream since 1970 in the eyes of the law, after all the civil rights laws were passed and after all those battles were won, African-American people only had access to the full, array of opportunity in America by law since 1970, and still there were battles that had to be fought and there's still battles being fought today, and we all know that. But with that being said, where my problem comes in, and what I'm challenging in one sense thus far, is when I hear people speak about these issues, and then when I'm in some of these spaces around African-American people, when they're making some of these blanket statements about we and the struggles, I also then hear them say this is what they do. This is how they save money. This is how they own businesses. This is how they, move in the world and able to pass down things to their children. And the they means European Americans, right? And that when I hear it, it bothers me, because I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to compare African American people who are descendants of enslaved Africans and our collective progress to the collective progress in this capitalistic system in America with Americans of European descent, because they have a several 100-year head start with having full access to the array of opportunities within the capitalistic system that makes up the quote-unquote American dream. So what that means is the same picture I painted with my grandfather passing down opportunity and breaking the cycle of poverty. When he started, well, there's European American families that started several 100 years before my grandfather got started with breaking the cycle in his family. And they were able to, those who came over here as immigrants several 100 years ago, were able to break those cycles and, begin to build, a level of stability for their families, for their children and grandchildren and children to launch into higher levels of success on the social economic ladder. So when you look at it at scale, it's impossible to compare, because they simply had a longer time to play the game, right? European Americans, generally speaking, have had a longer opportunity to play the game of capitalism in America, and everything capitalism and all of the benefits, it compounds. When someone owns a house for the first time, that stability, it compounds throughout the generations. When someone owns a business, it compounds. And then when you add on the fact that European Americans still make up the majority of the population, over 66%, when you look around, you're going to see European American success on a scale larger than African American success, again, simply because A, they've had a longer time within this economy with all the full array of opportunities, and B, they outnumber African Americans significantly, 66% to 13%. So I think it's unfair to make that comparison. And then the final thing that I want to say before I open up the lines to see if there's any commentary, and again, if you want to jump in, you could dial the number, which is 929-477-4107, and press 1 to speak. The last thing that I want to add to my statements that I made at the beginning of the show, as well as on Facebook, about challenging the idea of group economics. I want to just stop with that one right there. In a lot of these circles of African Americans who, are, and here's the thing, guys, when I say challenge, I'm saying challenge to continue to think through. I'm not saying challenge as if these people are wrong, because I believe they're right. All right. Because I believe that anyone that is thinking about solutions to a problem is right. We all come at this from different angles. We're working at this together. So don't take my challenges as me saying that, people are wrong. I just want to clarify that again. So what I want to challenge is that about group economics. This is what I'm thinking when I'm sitting in these communities. I'm taking in what I'm seeing in Atlanta. I'm taking in the things I know about my peers back home in Pennsylvania and just various places I've been throughout the country. And I'm seeing African-American people my age winning like at a larger scale, because we're the next generation up and we're building on what was built before us. Right. So when I see those things and I hear African-American people, when there are certain issues that face poor and working class African-American communities, and I hear people saying, group economics is the solution, that it is the solution. This is what I think. Again, critically thinking, this is what I think to myself. Well, if group economics was the solution, then why isn't that working for European Americans? Because based on the census in 2013, 18.9 million European Americans were poor. That's 8 million more poor European American people than African American people, and 5 million more than Latino people, based on the U.S. Census. And again, put on your economic hat. I'm not talking about social justice and privilege issues and anything from that standpoint right now. I'm talking about just from a strictly economic and capitalism standpoint. So in my mind, I'm thinking to myself that, well, European Americans have been practicing group economics from day one, because the country is still majority, homogenous, and people grew up in majority, homogenous communities, and European American people in America still for majority live around other European American people, and they have European American businesses, and their dollars circulate in their community X amount of times, and 18.9 million people. That's a lot of people. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. That's a lot of poor people. And that's not even talking about the levels above poverty where people are still working poor, right? So a large segments of European American people are struggling big time in this country. And again, I'm just using it as comparison. I'm not comparing it to the African American struggle with racism and systemic racism. Okay, I'm just looking at it from an economic standpoint. I'm looking at it from a sense, if the systems that we are supporting in terms of capitalism, the systems that we're supporting in terms of the education system, which again, I hear African American people say we have to educate our own. That's the solution. But then I think these European American people have been educating their own from day one. So why are so many of them still poor? I had the opportunity to go to college for my undergrad degree in a place called Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and it was a huge blue-collar, working-class, and low-income poverty segments of that city. and in that area of northeastern PA, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area. And by me spending about 8 years in that area, it totally shifted the way I looked at poverty. It totally broke down a lot of the stereotypes that were embedded in my mind about economics and poverty being only an African-American thing, because I grew up in spaces where people spoke about these issues being unique to African-American people only. And I understand why. I'm not knocking any of it. But it causes me to think critically. It causes me to think about things at a different level. So, and I remember teaching in Wilkes-Barre, and I had European-American kids that were in the classroom that fit some of the stereotypes that I heard, put onto African-American people. I had European-American kids in my class that were very, very disengaged with the educational process. I would call them, some of them were lazy. I had one kid, when I tried to encourage him, who told me, I just want to work at McDonald's my whole life. I don't really care about getting an education. So it's like a lot of the things that from an economic standpoint that I hear African-American people trumpeting will be the solution. I look at it from that standpoint when I study European poverty, and I've gone on to study European poverty at deeper levels throughout my adult life. For example, I read a book called Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, and he speaks to the issues that European Americans in the Rust Belt face and in the Appalachian face. And again, all these things just brought in my perspective. So with all that being said, I began to question, are these things the solution? Is group economics the solution? I've seen and studied how those things have been going on in other communities, and it still hasn't solved poverty. And for me, the solution isn't, well, look at how many people are winning. For me, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, look how many people are still suffering. And what I see is these systems that we're trumpeting, these systems like education and the way it's currently structured for the masses, public school education, traditional forms of education, they do what they're designed to do. It produces the exceptions, but it also produces the failures. Economics and capitalism, the way it's currently designed, it produces the exceptions, the winners, but it also produces the failures. And what I'm speaking to, let me speak to the next level, politics and voting. Based on my studies, and I'll get more into it as we go. I'm going to open up the lines in a second. But again, it puts us at odds, and it was designed to do that. So it produces winners and it produces failures by design. That's what I'm challenging. I'm not challenging any of you and the things you believe and why you believe them, because I understand why. We all have our we all are where we are based on what we've learned or unlearned, and based on how we've been raised in our values and our indoctrination growing up. So based on what we've learned and unlearned as adults, we have formed certain opinions and perspectives, and we're still growing. But what I'm challenging is the systems. I'm challenging the system of capitalism in this country. I'm challenging the system of capitalism in this country that has 11% of European Americans that are impoverished, and 26% of African American people that are impoverished, and 28% approximately of Native Americans that are impoverished, and about 20, I believe, and I may be a little off on these numbers, but a little bit less than African American percentage, about 20% of Latino Americans who are living below the poverty line. That's what I'm challenging the system of capitalism that continues to produce these results. And I'm asking all of you to think critically about doubling down the systems that capitalism have given us, like traditional education, doubling down on that and saying, I'm going to send my kids through that same system, and then later on continue to complain or expect different results. So that's what I'm challenging. So that's my uncommon commentary. Call up now. Tell me what you think. I'll expand as we go, but I'm going to stop there for now. Call 929-477-4107 and press 1 if you'd like to jump in and add to my perspective and the things I shared, and fill in any holes or challenge anything I said in dialogue with me. I'm more than happy to listen. So we're going to go to our first caller. Caller is waiting on the line. The last 4 digits of your phone number is 9477. Please state your name, and where you're calling from.
Hey, what's going on, Scott? This is Montoya here in Atlanta.
What's going on, Montoya? Thanks for calling in.
Hey, brother, I want to, like doing this from a critical thinking standpoint. I realize I've listened to you because I've heard you make pretty much. I've heard this commentary before from you. We're good friends or whatever. I've challenged you on the Facebook page. But what I realize is I don't think you realize it, but you actually make the exact same general statements that you disagree with when you hear certain narratives, and I'll give you your own examples. So, you said there may be a general statement about, for example, I know, and this is from an economic standpoint, but for example, you were just saying that there are narratives that people will say, well, African Americans as a group, or we say, well, we don't, you said use the term, we don't do this. And your response this morning was to say, here in Atlanta, where you are absolutely right, there are these amazing pockets of affluence within the African American community. And I heard you say in response to the general statement was about how you see all of these people who are graduated from college and all these people that are living in these homes and in these pockets of influence, the people that surround you. So you see all of these people. And I'm going to give you one more, and then I'll explain both. And then on the flip side, I heard you speak to, as you said, you put up the article about poverty, and you were, when you challenged the idea of group economics, you mentioned the idea that if it worked, how are you seeing all of these, for example, just due to the article that you put up, how are you seeing, this 18 million whites who are living below the poverty line? So you're saying this group economics is not working. So these are the two things I would have saw so that way you knew exactly what I was talking about. So on one hand, you speak to you actually use the term all these people that you see, whereas if I actually showed you the numbers, you would find out that all the people you're in your circle is actually a very, very small percentage of the African American community. On the poverty thing, using your own example, when you say it's not working from a group economic standpoint because you see, 18 million European Americans who are below the poverty line, which you are correct. Those numbers you said are absolutely correct. It's 5 more million than, Hispanics or African Americans, so those numbers are correct. But in perspective, group economics plays out when you find out, for example, that the average median income for a European American family right now is $141,000 versus the median wealth of African Americans is only $15,000. And so when we talk about circulation of funds, so that is with that significance of a difference, then nobody says that because the average median wealth for a European American family, nobody says because that is the number, that nobody's naive to the fact that there are still 18 million European Americans who also live in poverty. But from a group economic standpoint, you don't look at a 1 out of 10 ratio as if group economics is not working, because I would jump for joy if as an African American, I would jump for joy. Now, I know your passion is to end poverty throughout the world, and I respect that. But I would jump for joy to see, for example, and I'll be quiet after this, I would jump for joy, for example, if our poverty moved to 1 in 10 to 1 in 8, like double it to improve from that, because that would be a significant number. Here's the reality when you talk about exponential. There are no numbers that support the exponential increase, even though we have started late. There are actually economic indicators that have seen numbers go backwards. I'll give you one example, and I'll be quiet. Here in Atlanta, for example, we know about the 2008 housing, thing that created our economy crash, per se. Well, when you look at even in the affluent neighborhoods, there has still been no value returned to those homes, specifically in the African American communities, but with things that are happening currently in Atlanta, because we are seeing increases outside of in the European community. Their homes, they haven't recovered their full 2008 values, but it's about a 70% recovery, and we're seeing there's even some affluent neighborhoods in Atlanta that still haven't had a 0% recovery. So I know you don't like to make those comparisons, but the numbers don't show an exponential increase with a late start. We're seeing things go backwards. Half the boys in Georgia are graduating from high school. Only half the black boys are. That's not exponential increase, brother. Those are real numbers. So you like to say all when it's in favor, and the all ends up being a small number, or flip around and say, well, there's so many European Americans who are in poverty, when that's 1 in 10 compared to 1 in 4 for our community.
Okay. You got some time to stick with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So, thanks for calling up, and thanks for adding your perspective. And to speak to the all part, I don't think it's a fair comparison, because when I say all, I prefaced it to say all the particular, people that I was talking about in that moment, not all African American people.
Yeah,
so,
of course, that's what you mean. I'm sorry if I want to make it real clear. I'm sorry to cut in, but I do mean exactly the all that you're speaking of. I know I'm sorry if I even came on to not clarify that I thought you were speaking to all. I don't mean it that way. I'm talking about you referring to what, unfortunately, I'm saying ends up being a very small number when I look at the real number. I'm in Atlanta with you. I see the same affluence you speak of. But when I look at the economic numbers, for example, of Atlanta, and it being the fifth worst city in the country for economic disparity, then I know that, in fact, the same housing that I can go to and see all these predominantly black people living in these amazing houses, I know the reality is that they are a very, very small percentage of the African American community in Atlanta. So what I'm saying, you turn around and say all, you say it in a manner as if there are a lot. I'm telling you that reality is far from the truth. There are not a lot.
Okay, and again, I just want to clarify, because we're still saying two different things. So don't jump in this time. Let me finish.
Okay.
And let me say this. Again, I'm not saying you're wrong in anything you just said. I just want to clarify that when I say all, I'm not speaking to a lot. It's two different things. All does not mean a lot. All, in the way I said it, simply means all the people that I'm speaking about. When you heard me say all, I'm just literally talking about, when I say all of the people that I'm looking at, I'm just speaking about them. So when I'm saying all, I'm talking about the small, tiny percentage of people you're talking about. That's it. I want to clarify that and make that clear. I'm talking about that small, tiny percentage. And then, and I'm talking about when I look at my peers, even family and friends back in Philly, I'm speaking and seeing the same trends. And I'm sure you would agree that the African American, again, let's just call it middle class homeowners, living in these various communities. If we went back to can you give me a yes or no, and then I'm gonna move on. If we went back to, let's say, 1960, would you say that there's more African American people living the way we see here in Atlanta from the middle class level and up than there were in 1960? Just from the sheer population growth?
I know the numbers. Yeah, I know the numbers. There's no.
Okay, all right. So unfortunately, I'm sure I can't put you on the spot and say you have the numbers, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm making some assumptions. I'm making some hypotheses, and anyone can either call up and if you have some numbers, please do. Montoya, you can share them with me later. But the hypothesis that I'm making is just a matter of knowing population growth, knowing the whole idea of generational pass down and generational trickle down, et cetera, exponential growth and population growth. But the hypothesis that I'm making and what I'm seeing, just in the sense of how Atlanta has grown in population numbers in general, that there's more African American people that are living in these suburbs and these large communities and these subdivisions and these big houses and driving nice cars. That's kind of the assumption I'm making. Exponentially, there's more people getting. If you look at the numbers of people graduating from college across the board, just from the exponential growth, there's more people, graduating than were, many years ago and moving into the middle class space. On the flip side, I also know that there's that poverty is growing, and that leads me to my next point. The wealth gap that we often talk about, within between African Americans and European Americans, I feel like I'm starting to see that a similar trend happening within the African American community alone. And the wealth gap within the African American community between the haves and the have-nots, it troubles me. And the reason why it troubles me is that
looking at the numbers, Scott.
Hold on. Let me finish. Let me finish, man.
You're not even looking at the numbers for real, bro. Like, you're making these hypotheses without looking at real numbers.
All right, I want you to jump back in, but I'm gonna mute you out so I can finish. I know how you do this. I know how you do a mental dialogue. I sat there and listened to you for 5 minutes while you talk, so I want you to give me a chance to speak, and then I'm gonna let you back in, man. It's all love. So with that being said, again, bring the numbers. I'm telling you, a hypothesis is an educated guess. I'm telling you and all the listeners, I'm okay with being wrong. I'm thinking out loud. Please don't be offended, people. I'm doing it from a position of love. Trust me, I want solutions, right? So my point is this. When I look at the wealth gap and I look at the divide between the haves and the have-nots within the African-American community, it troubles me. And the reason why it troubles me is because, again, when I look at the results of capitalism, capitalism spits out exceptions and successes, and it also spits out extreme failure. Our education system, it spits out successes, but it also spits out extreme failure. And that's what I'm speaking against. I'm speaking against the mechanism. So when I'm speaking out against group economics, in the sense that when I hear people who mean well, I'm not knocking them. I feel like, Montoya, you're hearing me like I'm saying it's like people are wrong. I'm not saying that anyone is wrong. I'm just giving you, I'm speaking in an uncommon commentary. And when I say that, what I mean is I'm sharing with you guys how I think about things differently. Right? And we're colleagues in common pursuit of solutions. We just come at it at different angles. So with that being said, I'm challenging people to think about things from a different angle. And here's the angle. As Montoya stated, he knows that I posit myself as a poverty abolitionist. I don't see any value in poverty in society. I see no value in it. I see a lot of pain. I see a lot of suffering. And even, and within the African-American community, when I see all these people, when I say all, I'm speaking specifically about the people who are thriving in the current economic system. And I see these people doing their darndest to try to pull people up. But there's something that I understand, and this is what I understand. I want to share with all of you why I think this way. Because I used to be in a position where I thought that those things were the answer as well. And then I took a doctoral course called systems thinking, and it totally changed the way I think about all the problems we see in the world. It totally changed the way I see everything, right? And when you're having a dialogue, it's hard when we know that we're speaking based on different points of view, because we all know and read and research different things, and we may not have the same knowledge. So it's important that we listen to one another. And I'm going to listen to the facts and the numbers that Montoya is going to share, and I'm going to accept them. I'm not going to fight them, because again, that's his knowledge. I'm telling you, I don't have statistics. I'm making hypotheses based on what I see and based on things I read and I know. But just from a holistic standpoint, when I look at poverty versus success, I'm speaking about that. I'm speaking about capitalism from a systemic standpoint. And when I took my systems thinking class, there was a book called Thinking in Systems that we had to read. And there was a quote from the author at the very beginning that has stuck out with me, and I've used it a bunch of times, and it always rings in my mind when I'm thinking deeply about these issues. And it's this: hunger, poverty, environmental degradation, economic instability, unemployment, chronic disease, drug addiction, and war, for example, persist in spite of the analytical ability and technical brilliance that have been directed toward eradicating them. No one deliberately creates those problems. No one wants them to persist, but they persist nonetheless. That is because they are intrinsically systems problems, undesirable behaviors characteristic of the system structures that produce them. They will yield only as we reclaim our intuition, stop casting blame, see the system as the source of its own problems, and find the courage and the wisdom to restructure it. And that's by Donella H. Meadows in the book, Thinking in Systems. Now, for anyone who's listening to this that may be interested in learning more about systems, I'm going to include some links in the show notes. I wouldn't recommend starting with that book. It's a very academic and a hard read. For those of you who like reading that type of stuff, then start there. But for those of you who don't, I would recommend starting at some sites that I'm going to place in the show notes, and I'm going to place underneath this show on Facebook. When I repost it, I'm going to post a bunch of links. But systems thinking goes along a lot of different fields, whether it be systems thinking about social issues, environmental issues, education, business, economics, etc. But the key thing that I take away from what Donella said is that humans have been trying to solve these issues forever, and they've invested a lot of brilliance towards eradicating them. And no one is intentionally creating these problems. I don't believe that anyone is intentionally creating these problems. I believe that they persist because they're intrinsically systems problems. They're characteristic of the system structure that produced them. So, for example, if you had a car is a system. And if your car keeps, stuttering, it's not because someone is a bad person that, or you're a bad person because you're driving this car or whatever. It's literally the design, the way the car is designed. There was a flaw in the design, so now the car keeps sputtering. That's a negative feedback loop. That's a negative side effect of the design of that car. If it starts stuttering on you and other people are having the same issue and they do a recall, on certain issues within cars because of the design. And I feel like poverty is one of those things within our society that is the design flaw within capitalism, and that's what I'm speaking out against. And I'm going to offer solutions as well. But before I do, I'm going to let Montoya jump back in because I have some resources and I have some solutions and I have some things that can, for those of you who are listening and saying, Scott, well, that's just the way it is. We got to do the best we can. And what I'm telling you is it's not anyone who's suffering. When we look at, any of the statistics, and I'll just say this before Montoya jumps back in. Like for me, the statistics don't matter because if one person is suffering, I feel like we're doing something wrong. I'm taking this from a very radical standpoint. If one person is suffering because of the model of the systemic structures that we've created in this country, and we all know that millions upon millions, generation after generation, have suffered at the hands of, the various negative feedback loops that have come from our economic models. So with that being said, that's what I'm speaking out against. So for me, this is not really a argument in the micro, about the I'm not making a case in the micro about, the differences between those who are winning and those who are not winning within the various communities. The only reason I brought the statistics in about the European Americans is just to make a point on the onset to contrast it to, the way I hear, African American people within certain segments speaking about certain issues as if they're only unique to African American people in terms of poverty and things like that. And just to contrast it, to give all of you, the listeners, something to think about when you're thinking about these issues, to say, hold on, if they've been practicing these type of things for all these years, then why are there still 18.9 million poor European American people? That's what I wanted to challenge you with, because I wanted you to think about that and say, well, how can we move towards just eliminating poverty in general instead of kind of hanging our hats on, incremental wins or the fact that some people are winning. And as long as my family wins, as long as my kid, if we're talking about education, as long as my kid gets A's and goes to college and graduates, we're doing it right. And I just want to challenge that, because the same kid in your kid's class that failed or that may, have dropped out of school, we still got to face that person in society. We still gotta grapple with the failures, roles in society as well. And oftentimes they come back to bite those of us who supposedly are winning. All right, Montoya, so I want to let you back in, man. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it quick. And again, you always say that words matter, and I would just throw out to you, I want to say this too. I don't hear you. I mean, something you said. You think I can't even remember now, but you were suggesting that I'm hearing you as saying something's right or something's wrong, and I was going to try to clarify that that's not how I hear you. I am challenging you to and I'm going to keep it quick because we could do the numbers all day. So I'm just going to challenge you on one aspect that you quite often challenge the rhetoric and the verbiage that others use, and you're kind of missing that you apply the exact same logic in your verbiage as well. So I know exactly what you mean. I'm not misunderstanding you what you mean by all. I know you're talking about the all that you see, but logically, if I say, for example, blacks or you watch too much TV or on social media, for example, and that's backed by numbers based on the numbers that we can see. So if I say we, I'm not saying all, but you'll say to me, well, you can't just leave it out there without making a distinction. In response, you will turn around and might say, for example, I know all these blacks who learn from TV. I'm just saying, from a rhetoric standpoint, if I must be careful in not just generally speaking saying we, then you don't get to have all as a response to whether you're intentionally doing it or not, to insinuate, because you will say, because what I see doesn't look anything close to the rhetoric you just used. Well, somebody may have numbers to back that rhetoric, and you're just saying it based on what you see. So who's right? Again, you're not trying to be right, but I'm throwing out for you to negate their rhetoric, and you got to be careful with the rhetoric that you in turn use if you're going to say we need to be careful on how we speak. Or you speak to the opposite with hypothesis. I'm just telling you, you might want to go look at your hypothesis before you use your educated guess to make some of your responses. You're absolutely
Can I respond?
right as far as go ahead.
Can I respond about that?
I'm done. Yeah.
About that point right there. So I hear you, and I'm reflecting. And tell me if I'm wrong, because this is what I try to do. And what Montoya is speaking to, for those of you, Montoya and I, he's a regular guest on Race Haven, if anyone's new. We also engage with one another in Atlanta, and we, spend a lot of time in conscious conversation. So a lot of what he and I are discussing, there may be some things missing because we kind of know what we're talking about. But one of the things that he's speaking about is that the fact that I always say that we have to speak complexity in order to start solving complex problems. So I always challenge when people speak in generalized absolutes. So I always cringe when people say we when they're talking about African American people, as if African American people are all the same or anything like that across the board. Any type of generalized statement I challenge in a lot of instances. So what I hear Montoya challenging me on is saying that the way I'm using all is I'm making a blanket statement. And what I want to ask, because what's not vibing with me, I want to own it. If it's true, I'll own it. But I felt like, before I say all, I felt like I prefaced it. Like you gave the example of me. You said, which one did you just give?
I just made up one. I made up one about TV.
About TV. About TV. About people watching TV.
Just kind of made it.
Well, let me give it for that one. So when you said, you can't be on social media without seeing, a segment or a handful of people. We all, and this is an assumption, and really it's some of us have friends who will say, man, y'all need to turn that TV off if people start commenting about the latest, let's say gossip within the entertainment world. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us have that friend on social media that says, y'all need to turn the TV off, and that's the problem with African-American people. We watch too much Empire and, reality TV, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that Montoya puts out there at times is that the TV is the dumb box. And so one day I responded that a lot of people learn a lot from watching TV. So, and you use that as an example. And I feel like I prefaced it by saying a lot of, or there's a segment of people. And even in the conversation of today, when I use all, I felt like I prefaced it to separate, the various people that I'm speaking about. So I just want to say that maybe I didn't do a good enough job, but when I use all, I always set up and preface. I always try to, and I may miss it sometimes, but I try to preface my statement to clarify that a segment of people or a group of, people that I'm talking about before I start using a word like all. So, okay, go ahead. You had any other point? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem.
Got any other point?
So here's a quick way to kind of, I'm throwing out I want to throw it out to you real simple, for example, to understand it. So let's just use a set number, because I agree, people learn from TV. Of course, I call it the dumb box or whatever, because most people don't use it to learn or whatever. Of course, that's why I say it. But let's just throw out, for example, we got 100 people, and 80 people just use pure entertainment purposes and not learn anything, and 15 people who actually not only learn something, but like you said, they even go into the industry and become industry titans because they took such an interest in TV. And so, if I have numbers to say that, well, these people who watch TV, this is kind of how they perform, and it's 85 people, and you have 15 people, I'm just challenging you when your response to me is, I know a lot of people. If your real number is 15, I understand that you know people. When I say we, I'm not saying 100. So when I don't even think you say say the words generalized absolute. The fact that you would hear it that way. The reason it's general because the person knows they're speaking generally. They have information that says too many people do this thing that's not good for them, or you may say something good. People generally do this well. This group does this generally well, because everybody doesn't do it. So when people say we, they're speaking general. You're hearing it as an absolute, and your response, even though it may be a small number, you like to use terms a lot and all, and the reality is it's a small number. So I'm just asking you to think about that when, your response should be, well, there are some people who don't do that. But that person that spoke generally, response would be, Scott, I know there are some people who don't do that. But you like to say there are a lot, or there are all these people that are doing it. I know you're only talking about your preference, but that person knows that because they're speaking in general.
Okay, so I'm gonna respond because this is I actually planned on doing a whole show about this whole language thing because it's something very important to me, and I want to respond. We can get into it because this show is not just about my commentary; it's about wherever the callers want to take it as well. So because Montoya breached that topic, I'm gonna take a brief break and then come back and respond and kind of expand on some of my thoughts about why it's important to not use terms like we or they. I think it's so important. But I'm going to come back and do that in just a moment. But before I do, I want to, ask a question to all of our loyal listeners here at Race Haven. This is episode 28. We're a year and a couple of months in of doing this show, and I appreciate all of you so much. And my question to you was this: do you get value out of listening to Race Haven? If yes, consider becoming a patron of the show for as little as $1 a month. Your support will assist in the growth and maintenance of the show, and I would greatly appreciate it. So visit RaceHavenPodcast.com and click Become a Patron to learn more about our goals for the show and about the cool perks you can earn for your support. Again, that's RaceHavenPodcast.com. Click on Become a Patron, and you'll learn all the details about the goals and the perks that you'll get for supporting the show. And I also like to take this time to thank all of the patrons of the show, those of you who have supported the show, who support the ongoing maintenance and growth and quality of the show. It is so appreciated, and you help the show go forward. So with that being said, let's jump back to the show. And I want to jump back into Montoya breached the topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that's speaking in complexity. When I look at a lot of the problems that face society, I think that I believe that everyone would agree that they're complex issues, they're complex problems. And one of the things that I notice, and just as a kind of our culture, is we speak in general terms. We make blanket statements a lot. And Like actually started making notes for a book that I plan to write at some point, or it might just be a blog post on the topic. But I've been taking down some of these blanket statements that people make, And eventually I'm going to like either, again, do a blog post or put it into this book or both and kind of highlight what I'm talking about. So what I've said to Montoya in the past and what I'm saying now is that when people say things, and I'm always thinking about the next generation, I'm always thinking about how things are heard. And when people make blanket generalized, statements about we or they, I feel like that prevents us from getting into the complexity and the layers of what's really going on. And it's something that is very, like, you may be listening, you think it's very petty and it's very minor. But when someone, like what Montoya said, he said to me that, Scott, when I say we, I mean, what I mean. I mean most or a lot. Like, it's assumed, it's implied. But what I'm saying is we have complex problems in society. And one of the reasons why complex problems persist is because we don't think or speak. In a lot of cases, not all, we don't think or speak in complex ways. And the way we think and speak is usually based on the patterns of thinking and speaking that we grew up around. It's environmental. So if you grew up in a place, an environment where the people around you, they explain things to you in detail, they answered your questions in detail, they elaborated, and you were able to freely ask questions to dig down to dig through the various layers behind people's statements, then you're going to grow up thinking and speaking a lot different than the kid who may have grown up in a household where someone says, don't ask any questions. When if adults are talking, or the answer to your question is because I said so. If the answer to a kid's question his whole life was because I said so, then that kid never understands the underlying feelings, beliefs, thought processes, reasons, the complexities behind the various decisions that the adults in his or her life was making. So now that kid's going to grow up with a more narrow view, potentially in most cases, than a kid who grows up in a space where if the parent says, we don't throw our coat on the floor, and if the kid says why, if the parent says, well, the reason why is because, one, your coat could get dirty. Two, it makes our house look dirty and unkept. And mommy likes to keep the house looking neat and clean because, one, it makes me feel good about my house and where I live. And two, when we have guests come over, I like for those guests to, view our house as a neat and orderly place. So now that kid, again, grows up processing information in a totally different way. So that's the point. That's just an example of what I mean when I say it's important that we elaborate instead of saying we and they and making blanket generalizations, because it puts us in the habit of thinking through and going deeper in terms of digging deeper to find solutions to the complex issues that we face. Does that make sense, Montoya?
Absolutely. And the only thing I'll say to you is I want you to hear clearly, and I hope this is okay for the listeners, because like you said, we're doing this from a lot of conversations between each other, so I hope this is interesting to the listeners. But since you are speaking to it, I just wanted you to know, as your friend, I'm actually challenging you to listen to what you are advising others to do. What I am challenging you on is you actually speak in return to the person you're saying don't generalize. I'm actually challenging you that I think you're unaware that sometimes you speak back generally and don't, because in some of these issues that we've had, that I'm telling you this on, I'm telling you, you would actually find that if you were to speak back specifically as you're suggesting that they do versus generalizing, you'll find out you actually, in some of these issues, have very a lot of common ground. I'll give you an example to make it very clear. I kind of made up an example, but if you hear the statement that you cringe at because you hear it as an absolute, as a general absolute, well, if you say to someone who says, well, we're obviously talking about race, so if you say, well, all black people do this, and if you said to that very person that made you cringe, if your response is say, no, brother, well, some black people do this, that person will respond to you and say, oh, They were only speaking in general. They haven't learned what you're teaching them, so they're only speaking generally. But if you were to say, yeah, well, some of them do this, they'll say, oh, yeah, I understand that. And so now y'all can go to another conversation. But if your response to them is, no, there's a lot of people doing that, and that's not the case because you're generally speaking back to them, then we end up bogging down on a conversation and have to go into statistics to see, is your lot right or is your sum right? If you would speak back specifically, you will find that you can actually move to more solution talking by doing the exact same thing you're challenging others not to do. That's what I'm challenged to do.
So let me make sure I'm clear. And if anyone's listening online and you want to get into the conversation, you can call up with any topic race-related. It doesn't have to be specifically about what we're talking about, race or social, social issue related. The number is 929-477-4107, and make sure you press 1 if you want to speak. So, Montoya, what you're suggesting is that when someone makes a statement like, we don't know how to save money. I hear that's one that I'll hear right there. Mm-hmm. If an African American person is, in this space and out of a place of, usually out of a place of caring and wanting to see, African American people win in general, they say, we just don't know how to save money. You're suggesting my response, instead of me saying, but that's not true, a lot of us do know how to save money. You are suggesting I say what?
I would suggest, if you're going to say to that, because when you're responding, you're trying to see if they're generalizing or being factual. So your response should be more of, hey, brother, that's not true about all African Americans. There's definitely segments that financially understand how money works and are in fact saving money. What you will find typically that person that generalized, their response will be in complete agreement with you because they understood that they were only saying, generally speaking. So when you find out that that's their response, now there is no argument about stop saying that. Now you both can speak to how do we get more people saving more money, considering that, just giving a stat, for example, like 90% of our community don't have $1,000 saved. Like, that's a real number. So when somebody throws out, we don't save money, they're probably talking from an actual number.
90% of African American people who are descendants of enslaved Africans don't have $1,000 saved. That's what you're saying.
Right.
You got to send me some links where you get these numbers from.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
So going back to the initial commentary point.
If that, you understand that, just that little aspect that your
response. Oh yeah, definitely.
I be simply don't say a lot back to them. Just say what it is, and you'll probably find common ground. Is my only thing I'm saying.
Oh no, sure, I accept. I apologize. I should have said that. I was thinking to say that, but then I came back with the question. Okay. Yeah, but that was actually the first thing I wanted to say was thank you for sharing that, and I'll be more mindful of that. And again, that's what dialogue is all about. So I appreciate you. I received that 100%. So with that being said, I want to put another uncommon commentary thought out there. And again, Monte, I know you're going to have thoughts about this, and you've heard me play around with this thought a little bit. And I wanted to elaborate on it and just put it out there. And it's a thought process that I'm still researching and I'm still learning. But I want to put it out there for the listeners because I think it's going to give people something to think about. And whether you agree with it or disagree with it, I think that it's at least going to spark some thought. So the thought is this, and Montoya, I'll put you back on mute, and if you want to jump back in, I'll check in with you in a moment here to hear your thoughts on this. But so as I think about, critiquing this, okay, again, I told you guys I'm a systems thinker just based on, the direction of the things I've been exposed to and what I've been able to learn and what systems thinking has done for me in terms of broadening my worldview and how I see problems as systems issues and not people issues. So with that being said, I've elevated to a level where I used to focus on a lot of the issues that face African Americans in America. I used to focus on how those issues impacted from an African American standpoint, because I'm African American, even though, of course, this show, I speak to everyone and, I believe what I'm saying impacts everyone. But I'm going to speak to it from an African American standpoint. As an African American, when I thought about a lot of the issues facing African Americans collectively, I thought about it from a standpoint of the oppression of systemic racism and the institution of what this country was built on, which is the concept and the actions of something called white supremacy. And I know some people listening to this, there's different views on white supremacy. I don't want to spend too much time, but if you Google white supremacy, I'm not talking about KKK. Actually, I'm going to give you the definition of white supremacy I'm speaking on. I'm speaking about white supremacy is a racist ideology centered upon the belief and the promotion of the belief that white people are superior in certain characteristics, traits, and attributes to people of other racial backgrounds, and that therefore, quote unquote, white people should politically, economically, and socially rule non-quote unquote white people. White supremacy has roots in scientific racism and often relies on pseudoscientific arguments for that portray white superiority. So that's what I'm speaking of when I say white supremacy. I'm not talking about, extremist groups. So the country was built on those ideals, right? So with that being said, a lot of the issues that I would, when I thought about issues, I said, okay, these issues are a direct result of, this institution of white supremacy and all of its ills like slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration, and et cetera. And that's correct. That is correct. That system of white supremacy is responsible for a lot of the, the ills that plague African American people, that have plagued African American people generationally, and that unfortunately still has its tentacles on many African American people in different ways throughout society. And we don't have time to unpack them all now. But as a systems thinker, I began to dig deeper to understand this more, and I began to question if that was the place to stop. And I wanted to understand, well, what supports, because I understand that everything is a system. I wanted to understand, well, what system does white supremacy fall under? What supports it? What system gives it its power? And I thought about it like this, and I'm going to start even lower in a lower subsystem group. You see, racism, I'm going to start with racism. Racism is a tool of race. Without race, racism wouldn't exist. And race is a man-made social construct. All these systems that I'm speaking about are man-made social constructs. And what that means basically is that a human being actually created these things. Human beings actually created the idea of race. They actually said, you know what, we're going to create something called the races, and we're going to call, we're going to call Europeans Caucasian. We're going to call African people Negroids. We're going to call Asian people Mongoloids. And we're going to call, the natives, I forget, there was one more that I'm missing, but these what scientific racism is steeped in is the idea that, obviously, the things I just read, that Europeans are more superior because of the shape of their skulls, because of their intellect, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And they created this concept called race. And then throughout slavery, they began the idea of, there's black people and there's white people and, et cetera, et cetera. And then they built these laws and social norms that supported the ideas of white supremacy and race-based discrimination. But without race, there would have been no racism. So where did race come from? Well, race came out of what I just said. So I started with racism, and I said, and racism in itself is a system. Race is above racism, and that's a system. And then above race was white supremacy. Without no white supremacy, there would have been no categorization of these races in the way that we know them in terms of the social construct that we experience it here in America and actually throughout the world now, because as we know, colonialism through Europeans going out, they colonized a lot of places throughout the world in various continents, and they spread these ideals to a lot of places. So white supremacy supports race, and it powered race. But what supports and powers white supremacy? That's where I got to. And when I thought long and hard about it, I realized that it was capitalism. And I thought, without white supremacy, there would be no race. Well, guess what? And this is a broad statement, and this is really going to rock some people. and I don't even know if it's true. Again, I'm hypothesizing, I'm thinking out loud, but I'm going to make this statement. Without capitalism, there wouldn't be a need for white supremacy. And what I mean by that is, again, white supremacy is based in the idea of power. It was created to justify the means of which Europeans went out into other continents to acquire power and resources. And they put out this doctrine to, again, justify and support the accumulation of this power and resources. And so to justify my thoughts, I started researching capitalism, or to, I guess, go deeper, not to justify, but to go deeper. Again, this is a thought experiment. So I said, well, without capitalism, which is a complex system created as a means for private owning, trading, and acquiring goods and labor, and the competitive nature of capitalism meant that there were always winners and losers. That's a short definition that I pulled down. So I'm going to say it again. So what is capitalism? Capitalism is a complex system created as a means for private owning, trading, and acquiring goods and labor, and the competitive nature meant that there were always winners and losers. So without capitalism and without the need of competition to go out and get more, without the need for manifest destiny to conquer more lands and spread, to gain more resources. And back when capitalism first started expanding into new countries, it was, again, to acquire resources like precious metals and land that they could claim and parcel and sell and have private ownership and free market, et cetera, et cetera. And all these ideals that built capitalism that came out of feudalism, where feudalism was just, kings and queens, controlling people by force, came, initially, again, I don't want to get too deep into it because there's so much to unpack. I'm just high level. You guys will do your own research, right? But, out of those things and the reasons that, that were formed, capitalism formed, came white supremacy. And I posit that we can't go back to change history. So everything unfolded the way that it unfolded. But here's the thing. Man made it. Man created it based on the evidence and the knowledge and the skills and the technology of those times. And what I'm saying is based on the advancements and the knowledge, the technology, the information, the social advancements that we've made as people and as humans, I believe that it's high time that we create the next system. It's high time that we stop doubling down and investing in the very system that is the source of all of our oppression. And I believe that beyond, when I'm speaking to African Americans, beyond systems of white supremacy as being a source of oppression in various ways, I'm saying that capitalism is the key source. It is the root cause of oppression, not just for African people, but for all people who are not a part of that top 1% in the world that hold the wealth. You see, capitalism literally was born. It was another way, another form of the feudalism where the kings and queens used violence and force and fear to get the things they needed to survive, which back then was literally just food and having people farm and do labor. Well, they consolidated all the force and the power with just them. And then when capitalism opened up, power still was consolidated with the people who had the most resources and the most money. And that has continued. And again, it gave more people an opportunity to try to climb that ladder, but ultimately it still produces so much disparity. And for the sake of time, I won't go into all of it. So what my call to action is, and the purpose of this show, and when I said that I wanted to challenge people to think, and I was speaking specifically to African Americans this time, but ultimately I'm speaking to all Americans. What my challenge is what I'm saying is that capitalism is the source of all Americans. And actually, let me go back a step. The majority of working class, middle class, and no matter where you fall on the socioeconomic ladder, I feel like the source of all of our oppression, when we get away from just monetary, markers of success, capitalism is the source of all of our oppression in the way that it is implemented in society. Whether it be you have a ton of money in the bank and you have a good paying job, but you have to travel all across the world and you're away from your family every single day, every single week. Or you have a ton of money and you're working 40, 80, 90, 100 hours a week just to maintain a certain lifestyle and your quality of life sucks. Is that really winning? I question what success is. I'm challenging people to question what success is. And more importantly, I want everyone to understand that these are all man-made social constructs. And if dead people made these social constructs hundreds of years ago, why can't those of us who are alive today get together to start changing them? Or to create something, not change them, to create something new. And what I'm here to tell you is there's people already doing it. So one of the solutions that I want to share is there's an organization out there called the Next System Project. And if you go to thenextsystem.org, you'll see where they are curating proposals from people from all around the world about the next system. And there's some really awesome proposals being shared. But beyond the proposals, there's also people writing papers on things that people are already doing in various places around the world, including here in America. They're already creating models independent of the current economic model and capitalistic model that we currently have today. I'm going to give you 3 particular articles and proposals at the site that I love. One is called Growing Justice, Transcending Racism in the Food System. Right here in the U.S., it talks about people in communities who are taking actions, who are not just relying on the current food system, but are taking actions and creating new models for sustainability in their communities. There's another one called the Next Health System. The Next Health System blew my mind when I read that. There are actually communities of people who've created their own hospitals that are totally independent, where they take care of the people within their jurisdiction. They serve the people, doctors, nurses who are working with the people, for the people. The hospital is owned by the people, supported by the people, etc. It is totally self-sufficient. They have their own healthcare system. This is happening right now in several places. And this paper called The Next Health System lays out how to do it and why it's important and how it will change the system, the whole health system as we now know it. And the latest one that I've been reading and sharing on Facebook is called The Economy for the Common Good. Again, it's already happening. Some of the things that are being said in this proposal, it's already gaining traction. There's over 400 businesses around the world that have already opted in to change their practices to make sure that the bottom line is not to make money for owners and shareholders. The bottom line is to make money to produce towards the common good, produce for the common good of man, the common good of society. That's what economics should be about. It should be like nature. It should be a cycle where we produce to help people grow, to help people be healthy. The fact that right now we all know that healthy food is actually harder to get than unhealthy food, and unhealthy food is easier and cheaper to produce, and is justified because it makes people more money. We can look at any industry in America and then ultimately in the world, because we have a global economy, and the things that increase the bottom line in a lot of cases hurt people. And it's like we've come to accept, a lot of people have come to accept that as just, it is what it is. And what I hope I'm being a voice, and what my goal is, and what I tried to challenge people with the approach that I took to get the ears and the listeners to share my uncommon commentary. Ultimately, I hope that I'm empowering people to look into some of these alternative models and to stop sending your children and yourself and your family down the path that's already been laid, because it's going to keep producing the results that we've always been getting, which is some good and a lot of bad. And again, for the sake of time, I know there's a lot of context that's missing from a lot of these statements, but some good and a lot of bad. And I think in your mind, you know what I'm talking about in a lot of ways. I can give us several examples. I gave the food system. I gave the health system. So check out the nextsystem.org. That is a solution. It's a radical solution. And people are doing it. And here's the other thing I want to share with you. Because these things are happening, and a lot of us just don't know about it. And I just start learning about these things in 2016. There's something in America right now, an organization called B Corps. So you can form a business that's an S Corp, or it's an S Corp, or it's a C Corporation, or LLC, or a nonprofit. But now there's something called B Corps, benefit corporations. Some of the largest companies in America, companies and name brands that like Warby Parker, Ben & Jerry, Patagonia, Honest Tea Company. These are just a few I could think of off the top of my head. But there's Kickstarter. There's a lot of companies that are becoming B corporations. And the awesome thing about becoming a B corporation is that you have to take a B Corp assessment, and you have to make it public knowledge that shows you have to answer these questions that dig into how you're using your profits. Questions like, what's the difference between what's the income difference between the highest earner and the lowest earner in your company? And you have to say, it has to be at a certain level. There's certain indicators and markers that show what a healthy level is versus the unhealthy level in terms of the income disparities that we see in America and a lot of places in the world. And that's one of the things that the economy for the common good gets into. When they poll people from around the world, the people say that a 10-to-1 ratio is probably best. But in a lot of companies, it's a lot more than that. And in some companies in America, it's 350,000 to 1 in some companies, where the highest earner earns 350,000 times more than the lowest earner in that specific company. Imagine if it was 10 to 1. Imagine if the highest earner in a company earned 500,000. That meant the lowest earner earned 50,000. Imagine what that would do. But these are the type of things that these assessments for these companies who are becoming B Corps, these are the type of things they have to face and grapple with, and they have to answer these questions about their environmental impact, how the people that they're hiring to work for their company, the diversity within their company, the social justice aspects within their company, the gender equality aspects within their company, and the economic, equality and justice aspects within their company. And several companies are already doing these things and opting in. And if we start asking the suppliers, the businesses we go to, are you a B Corp? Are you a B Corp? And we start making them aware that this is a movement that's happening. If we start spending our money with B Corps, right, that's how we change the world. Because there's people that are already doing some of these things. And I want to encourage you guys, I'm just trying to spark your interest in hopes that, all the entrepreneurs out there, you'll look into what it means to be a B Corp. My company that I'm building, I have a mobile app company that I'm building right now. We're going to be a B Corp. So it's things like that that are already happening that give me hope, and I hope it gives you hope. And I believe that if you read The Economy for the Common Good, that it will give you so much hope. If you read The Next Health System or Growing Justice at thenextsystem.org, those things will give you hope as well, that yes, we don't have to settle for only some of us winning and some of us losing. We don't have to settle for a fact that there's going to be poor people. That's just the way it is. No, it doesn't have to be that way. I haven't even gotten to education, but I'm going to share links to solutions for education as well, because I believe that our current education system hurts people. That's why I walked away from it myself in 2012. I'm not saying it hurts people because the teachers are bad. I'm not saying it hurts people because the kids are bad. I'm saying it hurts people because the system is designed that way. It's intrinsically designed within the system for social stratification. I learned that in my doctoral studies in one of the history of education books that I had that one of my teachers gave, and they pushed us and challenged us to think about things in this way, to challenge the status quo. And when I read that education was designed for social stratification, literally to keep people where they are. If you're poor, we need you to be poor. If you're middle class, cool. If you're upper class, cool. You'll be the owners. If you're middle class, you'll be our mid-level managers. If you're the upper class, you're being designed to be the CEOs and owners. If you're middle class, working class, you'll be the managers and supervisors. And if you're poor, you'll be the laborers, etc. And education was designed for that. It wasn't designed to help everyone move up the ladder. It's not what it's designed for. Education is designed to give us exactly what we've been seeing. I have a problem with that. We're all humans. It's just a matter of how well we decide to treat one another. Every system that we're talking about was created by man. So why can't we change it now? Men and women together of all ethnicities coming to the table to change things and create a better, more just world that is more equitable. I believe we can. And what makes me feel good is that I'm not alone. TheNextSystem.org. Look at all the names of the people who signed on. If you scroll to the bottom, there's a list of hundreds and thousands of names of people who signed on to get behind this movement. Montoya, you have any thoughts on anything I just shared?
Yeah, absolutely. It's people with your type of passion, your type of beliefs that that come up with these systems, or as you said, in this situation, you're sharing these other ideas that you found or whatever along the way. So, I mean, the reality is every system that we speak of, though, really just came from the challenge of another system, even this idea of capitalism and socialism, and to jump all the way back to your very beginning, when you were just kind of giving the layers of, for example, from the African American community, which obviously I speak from that perspective quite often myself. I will just throw out to you that historically what we have so far for any system that has been adopted on a large scale, the failure, unfortunately, has always been the infallibility of human nature and greed to a certain extent. So what happens is, for example, even white supremacy, for example, it doesn't really matter technically which economic system that was in play. The things that you will see consistent are, for example, over-policing. And then even when you get outside of race, when you go back historically before the social construct was even put on the world per se, you'll see that different systems, same thing was in play as far as whatever group they wanted to oppress. And it had in most systems that historically we study around the world has nothing to do with race at all. But if there's a difference or a fight against another group, you will see the same tactics, and it is ultimately predicated, behind greed, which, once it seeps into a system, you're going to have those issues. I don't say that to say don't strive for other systems, because, again, every system was born out of a reaction to, whatever system's in play. So, we're at that stage now. A lot of things that we're watching happening worldwide and specifically in the United States, eventually, if the system of capitalism per se plays out to where there are too many have-nots, because we are seeing that gap wide for all cultures and races, then eventually the people, and that's why you have these pockets of communities already perpetrating. So whatever system that became large scale, it's like any other business in that standpoint. It takes marketing and buy-in, people like you sharing it, and more people doing it. And if it gets loud enough, you see small pockets take advantage and already put it in place, which is usually easily scalable on small scales. The issue typically with every system, and the failure happens once it's typically applied on a large scale, just because of who in that system chooses to be greedy. That's what you will see, the issues that you have really with any system, socialism, feudalism, whatever ism you want to come up with, is usually some person introduces greed and makes that system fail. Just an overall thought process. I mean, I'm in agreement with you from the standpoint of, you can't even change the system if you don't even think of these other systems. But, I will even just throw this out as a small defense of capitalism, not, which may sound crazy to you, but just from a standpoint, in comparison to what exists now, when you go system versus system, you will find that it is capitalism, for example, that created a middle class, because typically before middle class, the world literally existed in a have-not existence. So the fact that there is even a term such as middle class, there are people who can take capitalism and brag and say, well, that's what's created it. Or you can even look at the United States, and the United States might say, well, in comparison to a lot of countries, yeah, we have poverty, but it's at 13% for the entire country compared to, certain countries around the world. Now, other countries and even outdo that number. So, I'm just kind of throwing out, when you think of it from a large scale thing, the beauty of what you're doing, it kind of has to get born when a system starts to fail the majority of people, and we know that typically.
No, excellent context, man. And The other thing too, and I think I want to challenge other people to think about not just your bank account, but also think about your quality of life, because I think a lot of times people think that they're winning just because the bank account. Not everyone, some people, not all, may think, I'm winning because my bank account is a certain way. But I have a lot of conversations with people, who may have certain careers that make great money, but they're not happy. A lot of times, people who go and get degrees and have to end up going back to school or switching their careers a bunch of times because they followed the script. That's the script and the linear script that's available, but they very rarely took time to really think about how their true passions and skills align with various opportunities in the world. And that's all a part. That's just another flaw in the design of the system in terms of education, which again, I don't have much time to unpack, but that's one of the ways that education is flawed. It's just follow step by step, standardized connected dots type thing, but it doesn't deal with the dynamicism of human beings in terms of our, innate interests and skills and talents. And therefore, a lot of people get to their adult life and now they feel trapped because they have all these bills and all these debts and they have this job that pays a certain amount of money that they have to continue to maintain because they have this house and these kids and, and then it's like, but dang, I never had a chance to really think about who I am. And, I never had a chance to develop and cultivate me. I never had a chance to really, create and carve out a quality of life. I was listening to a book and it was mentioned, one of the books is going to be in the show resources called Out of Our Minds by Ken Robinson. And it was mentioning, a guy mentioned how, he sees that he's a 70-year-old guy and he noticed that, more people around him have more than ever before. He said, but on the flip side, their quality of life is worse than ever before. And he gave the example how, a lot of people are, he's seeing in the business world where people are nowadays, it used to be a time where when the Christmas holiday rolled around, people slowed down and stopped working and stopped taking meetings right around the middle of the month, around the 15th. And he said nowadays people are taking meetings the week of Christmas and still traveling, and they're getting back to work where it used to be mid-January. Now people are getting back to work and taking meetings right after the first, and just saying that everything's speeding up and, we're producing more and people are making more money and there's more opportunity in a lot of instances and a lot of, ways. But at the same time, quality of life is dying out. And that's a part of the economy and a part of capitalism as well. And those are the things that, that the economy for the common good speaks to, how people, we a lot of times you'll hear people say that, we need to be more involved in our communities and we need to spend more time with our kids and, or be more politically involved. And those things take time. And a lot of the reasons that people aren't, it's not because they're negligent, it's because they're serving the needs of maintaining a certain lifestyle. And there's a lot of conflicts in that. And the economy the economy for the common good speaks to all of that, and it speaks to solutions for all of that. And it speaks to, again, if you look at our health, a lot of our health issues are born from, that lack of balance. So these are the things that I'm passionate about and I care about because I believe that all of us deserve it. And I believe that if we continue to operate from a bottom line only mentality about what success is, meaning the amount of money in the bank account, if we continue to operate from that standpoint, then I just don't see that as, overall productive, from my perspective and overall, healthy from my perspective.
Yeah, I would definitely respect that. I respect that. Here's the thing. This is the beauty of human innovation for, again, like you think about it, even capitalism, for example, it used to be the economy for the good at the time when it came about. Again, just adding context and perspective. But here's here's the beauty of children. See, the millennials already reject everything we've been taught and honed to believe, and so some things that the society hates about them is the very things that they're going to ultimately create because they already come to jobs asking about life balance, things that we don't think to ask to until we've reached a certain position because we've earned a certain spot to be able to say, well, I would like to have more vacation time. They come in asking for vacation time. It looks weird to our society because of how we were raised, but it doesn't look weird to them, and that's why they create all these amazing work out from home and beautiful computer apps and come up with Ubers and the Airbnbs because they don't think on this very bad paradigm that you are right does get applied to typically those with less privilege have less access, and so you fight to bring that access to the masses. So to a certain extent, human innovation is going to get there. It's already there for a number of people, but not the masses, which is your concern, and I agree with you, my concern as well. But, just generally speaking, more people are starting to realize what we were taught, and from a mass standpoint, it's definitely not the way to go, and we're people like you is the reason why we're gonna head, in a different direction. I will say, while just to throw this out, without the tearing down of white supremacy, and again, I don't think it's definitely started and pushed fully forward because of capitalism, just because of the type of greed that even created the idea of it needing to exist. So I will agree with you from that standpoint. I will say for all the innovation that is about to come back, without the eradication of white supremacy, there is a strong possibility that you will have an underclass that does get left behind in all of the new innovation, because the system can be set up to keep that class from never understanding the things you just talked about.
You're absolutely right, and everything you just said is right. So the first thing I want to speak to is, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it out. But when you said, how we every generation builds on the gains of the previous generation. One of the places I'm currently taking a online course on systems thinking at the Unschool, and I'm going to post a link for that as well as a refresher and as I continue to learn systems. And the woman, her name is Layla. I just can't pronounce her last name, but her name is Layla. And she says, one of the things that she always says is that today's problems are yesterday's solutions. Today's problems were yesterday's solutions. So we have to continue to evolve and continue to innovate. Because of that, and that's kind of what you spoke to. And then the last thing is when you said, you talked about, the issue of white supremacy and that system and how it still has so many, negative impacts on society. And one of the things I always posit that we don't have time to get into in this show, but I believe that it has the institution or ideal of white supremacy also negatively impacts European Americans in a lot of ways as well, just differently than it does African Americans and not and other, ethnic minorities in terms of population. It impacts them as well. Just some of the negative feedback loops and side effects of white supremacy that pushes back, that causes stress and tension in their lives. That's also a result of the institution of white supremacy, and is also why it's in their best interest ultimately to help eradicate it. But again, that's for another show. But in terms of going deeper into that, but ultimately, when I think about, how to get rid of white supremacy, I think that, again, if we go to the root and we can design it out, if we go to the root and we redesign the economy, then we'll design out that greed that supports white supremacy. And that, everything that it was built on, it will literally be designed out. And again, I hope that many of you will will go and read The Economy for the Common Good at the nextsystem.org. I'm going to post the links on my Facebook page and in all the Facebook groups, as well as on my website, RaceHavenPodcast.com. And you'll be able to click the link to read it, because if you read that, The Economy for the Common Good, within that framework, there's no room for white supremacy. There's no room. And that's one of the things I've always thought about, because systems thinking is all about design. It talks about design a lot. And one of the things that Layla talks about at the Unschool is about design. And we can literally design white supremacy, race, systemic racism, and all those things. They can be designed out of society similarly to how they were designed into society. And that's what we need to continue to work towards. So ultimately, that was my challenge for today, and I appreciate all of you for listening. Those of you who stuck with us the entire time, so those of you who are listening to the podcast and you're, pausing and coming back to it and you're getting through it, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening. Thank you to Montoya for calling in and contributing his thoughts today. It was more like a traditional Race Haven, show with when Montoya, myself, and John, we get together and we dialogue on a topic. That's what this ended up being. Again, I'm piloting this whole call-in, format to see if there's people who have interest in calling in and dialoguing about various topics, asking questions and sharing perspectives. I know race is just it's a tough topic, and also, having it being spoken about out loud, like the way that I do it, I know there's other people that do it. I just know that it's not being done, in this way where people across ethnic lines are coming together, which makes it challenging for some and out of the norm for some. And just from conversations I've had, I know that there's some people that just would rather not, because they're, the post-traumatic stress of all of this that we've been born into is too much. And some people just don't have the energy, to dialogue across ethnic lines and, look at it from a holistic standpoint. And I understand that. And, I just appreciate it if you're just listening. But I'm going to try this format a couple of more times to see if we can get some callers, some midday callers who may be able to call in on their lunch break, or some of those, those people who work from home, or some entrepreneurs who can call in. And, we'll go from there. We're still going to continue to do the dialogue shows and the interview shows, but just piloting this whole, call in, the people calling in to share thoughts and ideas and questions for a couple of more weeks, and we'll see how it goes. So with that being said, again, thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. Be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven Podcast on the iPhone podcast app or Stitcher Radio app for Android so that you never miss the dialogue. And if you love this show, please leave us a review on the podcast and Stitcher apps. This will help the show gain more visibility and listeners. Also, if you love this show, if this show adds value to you, please consider becoming a patron of the show for as little as $12, $1 a month, by visiting RaceHaven.com, RaceHavenPodcast.com, and clicking on Become a Patron, and help us reach our next goal and help, with the quality and maintenance and growth of the show. Also, if you want to share any thoughts about the show, please do so by sending us an email at solutions@RaceHavenPodcast.com, or join us on Facebook at RaceHaven Podcast to continue the dialogue. You can also join our online chat community by joining the RaceHaven Community Dialogue Facebook group. And to close out, I want to share what a Race Haven is. A Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race and unify America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Love y'all. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. Be sure to visit www.racehavenblog.com to comment and learn more.